you gonna do when we get off this rig? Play video games all day?
I'm sure they got better things to do with their time.
Hello, I'm Leigh from GeekyBrummie.com, and I'm here speaking with Tom Keane from Godolphin Games, and he's here to talk to us about Unknown Caller, a first-person talker. So Tom, please tell us about this game.
It's actually unknown number, first-person.
Unknown number. I keep like every time I look at it, I keep getting it in my head that it's Unknown Caller, but yes, unknown number.
And that's actually weirdly why it's the important thing is the first-person talker part in a way.
Yes.
Because for us that's the most exciting part of it. That actually this game for us is kind of exploring what voice control would look like. If it was a core mechanic, and unknown number is for us like the first game in a series of games that will keep experimenting with voice and keep pushing that as a core mechanic. I think one of the reasons we're doing that is voice everywhere within technology is like so ubiquitous. Like I say "Hey Google" to turn music on. I shout at pretty much every device I have, and yet weirdly like it doesn't exist in gaming. Like not really. And it's coming. It's just the question is when. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of essentially trying to kickstart the process a bit and get people kind of getting back into voice again after some really nasty experiments with Xbox On, etc.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what was the inspiration behind using voice? Obviously you said about like Google devices and things. So what was kind of the key moment that made you think I'm going to make a game where that's the primary control method?
Yeah, I think obviously there are loads of games that I really love, but I think it's interesting how in a way there's a set of things that really work that people really love and keep coming back and kind of reiterating on, and what we were interested in as a group was going, well, what hasn't been done within gaming that has been done elsewhere, and if we collide those two things, what could we do? And actually, interestingly, I actually came from a slightly different angle because I've done a bunch of work with Amazon Audible and podcasts and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of going, well, what would an audio-only game look like? And I did some research into that. And actually, in the end, that wouldn't be great for a number of reasons because there's, you need the visual stimulus, you need the feedback. But it kind of took us this route of going, well, actually, voice is so central to everything, and it's almost a cliche within the world of brands, which is a bit of my background from a good few years back. The cliche was are you voice ready yet? Is your brand voice ready yet? Is your fridge voice ready yet? And it's literally that level of like it's like voice obsession. And then at the same time I'm like playing a bunch of games, and then it's just like, wait a second, there's like no synergy, no like crossover between those two conversations. Mm-hmm. and that's kind of where it came from.
Okay. So, like, one of the things that I was thinking about with all of this, though, is obviously voice-driven. One of the main problems that's emerged from a lot of voice commands is things like accents and when people are mumbling and things like that, just as a sort of accessibility issue. What sort of steps are the team taking to try and address that?
Yeah, I think that is totally a good challenge on it. I mean, it's one of the core things we've been doing. So when we test with different accents. And actually, in particular, we run Siri tests, with simulated accents, and we kind of literally just put it through the machine, and we see kind of what success rates we get back. So kind of accents, but before that, I should say that I've been putting on a lot of very bad accents, really embarrassing myself with my American accent. But yeah, so we've built accent testing into our process. In terms of mumbling, I think it's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that is interesting is, there does need to be a bit of precision in speaking, but in the same way, if you're playing a first-person shooter, there needs to be some precision with your button pressing, mm-hmm. And actually, I think for us, the breakthrough has been going, if you think of voice as a method of control, as like a gameplay control thing, like a joystick or a joypad or whatever it might be, it's okay to ask players to speak precisely. It's okay to ask players to say the right things, in the same way that to jump over a rock in a first person shooter requires space jump and forward at the same time, etc. Mm-hmm. So there is some skill, but it's quite funny because we've never really thought of voice as a skill before, especially not like a mechanic gameplay skill. So that's been sort of part of our process of actually working out what is okay for players to have to do and what isn't okay to ask them to do.
I've had a look at sort of some of the information you provided, and sort of seeing some of the gameplay mechanics. So a lot of this is sort of revolving around phone calls, essentially. So could you kind of give a little bit of elaboration on how all that works?
Yeah, I mean, so the game, I mean, when we first built a prototype for the game, the concept was, why don't we actually use real phone calls and call people up, and then they can play the game by speaking down the phone to these kind of pre-recorded actors and action down the end of the phone. And what we realized was actually doing it down a real phone call is annoying for so many different reasons. It's annoying because you have to pay for the calls. It's annoying because voice recognition down phone lines is pretty much one of the worst things of all time. I don't know if you've ever been in a customer service call. Like, it's punishing.
Yeah.
Punishing. And the reason is because the fidelity isn't good enough, right? But the third most important thing was that you get no visual feedback, right? So it really limited what the game could be. So what we've moved into now is essentially, the game simulates a series of phone calls from, two eco-warriors, eco-terrorists, whatever you want to call them, in the middle of this very daring heist in the kind of the North Sea, trying to steal many millions of dollars in cryptocurrency from this kind of oil baron, and they need your help, and they accidentally dial your number into chaos, and you get swept into this kind of drama. And you kind of, armed with only your voice, you have to help them succeed, or you can stab them in the back if you wish. There's all sorts of different options. But yeah, what we loved about the phone call mechanic was that you're playing as yourself. You're not playing as an avatar, as some sort of character in a fake world. You're playing as yourself in the real world. And as a result, all the moral decisions feel so much heavier and so much kind of, I don't know, much more fun, to be honest, because if you kill them, you feel like you're killing them. If you betray them, you feel like you're betraying them, and they feel like they're your intimate friends that have been chatting down this line to you. And the stakes just get so much higher when it feels like it could be, real life. It's like an AIG on sort of on crack, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say like an AIG. That was the vibe I was getting from a lot of it. It's the same sort of like you'll get a phone call or you find like something on a website somewhere. How much influence did you take from existing ARGs, if any?
Well, the AIG thing is probably the birth of this for us. I mean, so I used to work for Xbox, and I was involved in a series of marketing ARGs for Halo, or Halo in particular, but also Sunset Overdrive and a couple of other things. And we essentially created glitches on television adverts where people would catch a code and then it would start this kind of ARG experience, and people really loved it, obviously, and I think that was such a great period of experimentation that everyone was going, oh my god, we can link up all these different touch points, but again it's gone slightly quiet. So I was going, well, how could we revitalize the ARG? And the thing that you plug into it is voice, because and actually real characters and not keeping it too cryptic, because I guess my criticism of my previous work and the work of other ARGs is potentially it can feel too codery and hackery, and like deep web stuff, and actually kind of lacks a bit of heart. So we were going, well, why can we actually make it a human story that you're partaking in? So it's an ARG that is that you can feel and maybe even cry and also laugh at, rather than just feel clever at.
Yeah, because there is just a lot of like conspiracy theories sort of stuff around it. And it's like, oh, I've got to find this code in there, and you're right in what you're saying about it kind of feeling a bit kind of dry. But
I do love them, by the way. I'm not slagging them off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love ARGs as well. That's kind of why I was interested in asking, to be honest. It's interesting that you sort of saying about like you wanted it to be an ARG that would make you laugh, make you cry. So what was sort of the inspiration of like using like eco warriors as a theme? What was the sort of inspiration behind that and marrying that to this mechanic?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of like answers to that, I guess. I mean, the first really basic one is the crisis we are in right now as a globe is the climate emergency, and I just think just as kind of in the 60s, 70s, the crisis that everyone was in at that moment, or so they perceived to be, was the Cold War, and every single movie at that time was about the Cold War. Every single movie had the setting of the Cold War. Every James Bond thing was, we're talking about Blofeld and whatever, but it's really about the Cold War. I sort of feel that today everything should sort of be about the climate emergency, at least as the kind of the backdrop. So in a way, we don't think it's almost that radical. It's just kind of the natural response to the thing that is threatening impending doom and apocalypse. But beyond that, I think the thing we find interesting about the climate emergency is that so much of getting ourselves out of this mess is going to be down to the personal choices we make. And so therefore a game that directly calls you up and challenges you to make decisions feels like a really good way of exploring that, I guess. A really effective way of kind of going, well, what's your personal responsibility in this? What decisions are you going to make that make a difference? And I should really, really, hammer home that this is not a big kind of browbeating, big moralistic thing. We see this as akin to almost like Pirates of the Caribbean in kind of tone and energy.
Yeah.
But it should hopefully also make people think and ponder and also, look into the abyss and wonder about what we can all do to make things better and what kind of radical actions we might be able to investigate for ourselves.
Yeah, so it's interesting saying about asking people to make their own personal choices. You said that you're the character in the game. Obviously, this does seem to be very narrative driven. How much choice does the player have in this game?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you. Well, there's a bunch of choice, right? It's a branching narrative game. There is kind of one really major branch, in terms of going, are you going to be that kind of player or that kind of player? And then within that, there are, also other branches, but they're kind of branches that kind of come off and reconnect and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that said, we do have 4 to 6 different endings, depending on how you look at it, and depending on how you add them all up together. Because one choice plus another choice equals a different ending, and so on and so forth. So there is, there's some big choices, and then there's some smaller choices that will affect your playthrough. And then there's some really small choices, like if I answer that one thing to that and I get that response, if I'd done it a different way, I would have got a different response entirely, but it doesn't quite impact the story. So it's kind of like there's almost like, for us, there's like massive choices, medium choices, mini choices, right? And then you glide them all together, and that's how you get to your 4 to 6 different endings.
Yeah, that sounds actually really, really interesting, because I think it does follow on from a lot of sort of other narrative-driven, choice-driven games that you see out there at the moment. So definitely sort of fits in with all of that, but with obviously your unique audio-driven playstyle, really.
There is one thing I probably should mention that is important, is we've spoken about it being a branching narrative game.
Yep.
I think the thing that I really want to stress is that it's actually first and foremost a puzzle game. So, because I think one of the big questions we get is always like, oh, so it's like, it's choose your own adventure. And it's like, no, it is. But it's kind of also, it's a choose your own adventure with a series of very serious gates. And you can't progress through the gates unless you crack the code, unless you, say the right thing, unless you give them the right directions, unless you, whatever it might be, impersonate an oil exec on a conference call, or, depending on the puzzle.
Cool. I mean, from on the back of that, actually, so from what I've seen of the game so far, like, it does seem like you kind of use a lot of the phone besides just calling in those. Could you kind of maybe elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. I think so there's kind of two sides of it. One is we're going, okay, well, what could you do with your voice? What could you do with your voice that's reliable? As in a set of passwords, a set of directions, a set of almost like constrained interactions that deliver maximum impact for minimum error potential, right? And then on the other hand, we're going, well, we've got this quite unique scenario where the game is based around phone calls, and the UI looks like a telephone, and there's a series of numbers and letters and little icons here that we all know really well. But what could we do to turn them into puzzles? And so we basically just kind of systematically again tried to explore, well, what can we do to mess with the UI to kind of play with it? I'll give you one example. On the number keys is a tone, so right? And and actually at one point in the game you actually have to play a little tune on those tones, and that's one of the ways you crack into the vaults, which are kind of like very deep webby and whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's other kinds of things that basically go like, well, what else could you do with the UI, and what else could you do to mess with it? But it's that thing of, we're lucky because no one's done it before. No one's done a phone that looks like a UI. Well, I'll take that back. People have done a lot of phone sims, but what they have done is almost like quite a realistic thing. Whereas we're kind of in the realm of the hyperreal. You know, what if your phone was being semi-hacked, and what if it could all move around, and what if things were a bit unexplained and a bit mysterious, and there feels like there's some sort of meta conspiracy happening. You don't really understand it, but so you can move the buttons around, and no one's going to go, hey, that's not very realistic.
Cool. Obviously, you said sort of at the beginning of this, like, you were hoping this be the beginning of a series of games. So do you have plans like going beyond this?
Yeah, we have loads of plans about what kind of games we make next. I mean, the next one we're looking at, of course, and we're already investigating it, is the video call version.
Okay.
Right? It feels like it's such a no-brainer. This for us is our kind of our real experimentation palette. And we're working out the bounds and confines of what we can do, and then we're gonna supercharge it eventually within it'll be a few years. Into video calls. And also, I think that what we hope is that there'll be some recognition of this game. Just, I don't mean mass recognition, but I mean hopefully we can start finding the right kind of publishing partners and the right kind of avenues to actually reach a wider audience as well. With this, using our first game as a real testing ground for it, and proof of concept, and make everyone go, it works, it's exciting, etc., etc. Because we've spoken to so many people, and everyone goes, love it. Is it going to work, and is it going to be fun?
Yeah.
and we firmly believe it works and is fun, but we need to do that proof for everyone to come on the journey with us.
Yeah, because that was sort of what kind of grabbed me about this. Is it's such a unique idea that it feels like it should have been done before, but hasn't really been done before. And outside of things like, I don't know, like Hey You Pikachu on the N64, which from all accounts didn't really work all that well. So when can we expect to see Unknown Number?
Well, the plan is early 2022, so around March time, we think. I mean, there are things that might have a bearing on that. Like we're in conversation with potential partners who may need to push it back, etc. So if we sign a great deal or something, we might be pushing it back at the end of the year. But at this current moment, we're looking at getting out early 2022.
So obviously, like I said, it'd be out in 2022 is what you're aiming for, and it's on PC and mobile, I believe is what you're looking for. Yeah,
it'll be on PC and mobile. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, it sounds great, and I'm sure that we'll be doing a lot more coverage on that as it gets closer to release. Thank you for joining me, Tom, and sharing your game with us.
Thank you.
We'll chat again soon.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.